Welcome to our Virtual Pinkster Celebration. I'm Melissa Branfman, the Executive Director at the Wyckoff House Museum, New York's oldest standing structure located in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. Today I'm thrilled to be in conversation with my colleagues, historians, and Pinkster enthusiasts to talk about the history, mythology, legacy, and lies of this lesser-known colonial holiday. I'm joined by my colleague Meredith Horsford, Executive Director at the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum, Manhattan's oldest and last remaining farmhouse, located in the Inwood neighborhood of Upper Manhattan. On May 23, 2021, the day of the Pentecost, or Pinkster in Dutch, we are in conversation with two experts on the subject, Lavada Nahon and Chief Clarke. In addition to being an incredible scholar on the Pinkster celebration, Chief Clarke is a master percussionist, a Schomburg scholar, an educator, professor, and cultural producer. Born and raised in the Brooklyn neighborhood of Bedford-Stuyvesant, he joins us today from the heart of Brooklyn. Lavada Nahon is probably best known to us as a culinary historian and scholar specializing in the Mid-Atlantic, especially New York, from the 17th and 19th centuries. Today, she works as the first ever interpreter of African American history at the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Her passion for cooking, history, food, culture, and enslavement is infectious. She is the reason we are all here today, digging deeper into the understudied Dutch and African American Pentecost celebration known as Pinkster. Could you tell us a little bit both about what Pinkster is? What is the Pentecost, the Dutch Pentecost, to start off?
Well, actually, it's not just Dutch. We do use the word Pinkster, which is a shortened version of the Dutch word for Pentecost. But Pentecost is the second feast of the Christian church. It is actually when the Christ it was his last day on earth. He gifted the apostles the Holy Spirit. They pushed the windows open from the upper room and spoke to the people in Jerusalem beneath in languages that each heard in their own tongue. So it is really the official beginning of the Christian church. And it is celebrated all over the world. But here in New York, because the Dutch were the first settlers here, it is their language, it is their take that we step out into the celebration of Pinkster or of Pentecost, and that's why it's called Pinkster here. Over time, it takes on African traditions. It becomes a time of rest for the enslaved that they don't have any other time of year. So it is a very well-documented and very special time for history, finding, I always say, joy in the slave years, because it is the joy of survival. It's the joy of connection. It's the joy of culture that I'm hoping more people will embrace.
Well, for me, Pinkster is very significant because it is probably, well, it is definitely the oldest recurring celebration of African cultural heritage that people publicly celebrated, that people publicly engaged in, I would say on the continental United States, or what we know today as the continental United States. And it's so very important because so much of the conversation about enslavement is about African people being taken, being stolen, being brought here. Their identities are being stripped from them. They're being assigned identities, names, and the underpinnings of culture and identity being disassembled. And here you have, for 200 years, you have people who are actually celebrating their heritage and their culture and their history, which predated their enslavement. So where we talk about what was taken away and what was forgotten, here you have people who are actually engaging publicly and proudly and celebratorily, if that's a word, in their pre-enslavement heritage and culture. And I think it's very important that in the conversation about Africans in America and America in general, and the contributions that people of African descent have made, that we can talk about them actually celebrating their heritage and their history and their culture. I think it's very important.
At the Dyckman Farmhouse, we're located in Upper Manhattan, in what we now call Inwood. When I started working there a little over 6 years ago, we had very, very, very little information about the people who were enslaved there. You know, we knew that there was an enslaved man between the ages of 18 and 40 who lived there in the 1820s. So in the early 1820s. So the information was very limited, and that led to a lot of conversations with visitors about what we knew and what we didn't know. So about 2 years ago, we got a grant from the New York Community Trust, which was really helpful for us. We hired a research assistant to do extensive research. This is really challenging research because the Dyckmans, as well as I'm sure many other families, kept virtually no records of the people that they did not treat like human beings. So it was quite a challenge to come up with and unearth information about these people that we've been really wanting to know more about. So through that project, we were able to uncover about 5 names of people. So for us, that's really, really exciting to be able to talk about Francis Cujo and Hannah and Harry and Gilbert, and to really address people by their name and talk about them as human beings who had lives long before they were enslaved by the Dyckman family. So that's been a really great project for us. And so what we're thinking about as our next steps are, how do we take that information that we have found and kind of infuse it throughout the museum and really infuse it throughout our public programming. So we started doing a lecture series on race, which has been really popular and, you know, great to have virtually, so we can have attendees from all over. We've had attendees from the Netherlands, we've had attendees from California. So it's great to just sort of bring people together with kind of experts in their fields to talk about race from the standpoint of anthropology or archaeology or historians. So those kinds of programs, I think, have been great to kind of embrace our community, which is largely Spanish speaking and largely from the Dominican Republic, in conversations about race and how we can connect this history with kind of our present day lives. So that's what we've been up to for the last few years. And so I'm curious if you two could tell us a little bit about kind of how does conducting this research, how important is that for historic sites? And then what are your thoughts on how we can engage people in this history, which we know is so important?
First of all, I want to thank you, Meredith, for the work that you guys have done at Dyckman, because this research is vital. One of the things that we know about our area is that we are underdocumented. And what is taking so long is that we are still going into archive collections. We're still handling, in many cases, 17th and 18th, early 19th century documents. We are still many historic sites and many historic societies. Like, we have all these small towns all over the state of New York where things are still in boxes that haven't been read. They may not even be in English. They could be in Dutch. They still need to be translated. So every time we can find a name, every time we uncover a burial ground, every time we see, and it is like a name, one name and a letter, right? Generally telling them to go do something, or have somebody tell them to go do something, or they're being sold, or they're sick. But it's like that one name here and that one name there, because what a lot of people don't realize is that if there is a will, if somebody leaves a will, they may not actually name the enslaved people. They can say, I leave all of my servants, all of my people, all of my Negroes to my son or to my daughter. So we don't get those names. Other times we find those names there. If there is an inventory They will sometimes list the names out, but we find them in so many places going back through the census records. And this is helping us to help the public understand that there was enslavement in New York. Because enslavement has been so connected to the Civil War, a lot of people just don't even realize that New York was the second largest slave market in the in the colonies. A lot of those people didn't end up here. They actually came through here being sold to the Caribbean. Most of the major New York families are connected to the Caribbean, whether that is through sugar or trade or in some way. So we have people flowing directly here from Africa. We have people flowing here from the Caribbean. And so all of that research is vital, but the challenge is we're still in document phase.
You know, and I just like to say that I think it's very important, the work that institutions like yourself are doing, and the need for more work like that to be done, and so that we can inform the public for a more accurate understanding of where we are in history. We're talking about identity. We're talking about self-esteem. We're talking about empowerment. We're talking about enfranchisement. We're talking about so many things that are going on in society today, and the enslavement has such a tone of stigmatization to it that people whose heritage is from the enslaved don't want to identify with that because it's inferior, and people who are descended from those who perpetrated that don't want to deal with it because they don't want to deal with the guilt and the responsibility. But in order for us to have an accurate telling of what the history of this country is, I think it's important for us to understand. It's like we talk about nutrition. You want to know what you eat. So what do? You look at the label and see what the ingredients are in the package. Well, we need to really take a good hard look at what the ingredients of this country are. A point from Holloway's book, Africanisms in American Culture. Melissa, do you have that? Here you go. Yeah, that's Joseph Holloway. It's a very important book because there are so many things that are fundamental, that are essential to the fabric of what we know is American culture, that because the people who made those contributions are not the ones who did the documentation, their contributions are not accurately included in the narrative, if at all. So that old proverb about, if only the hunter's tale gets told, then the lion's side of the story never gets told. And I know I didn't get that clear, but essentially it's important. It's important that self-esteem, pride. I really feel that the contributions of Africans and what they brought with them, that's rooted in so many of the pre-enslavement civilizations, empires, kingdoms, from the Congo, from Mali, from Yoruba, we can go on and on and on. People that came here with technology, with skills, with agricultural skills, growing rice, architecture, hunting, navigation, all of these contributions that went in, that Africans brought, they didn't learn it in chains. They didn't learn it in the bottom of a slave ship, and they didn't learn it on the plantation. They brought it with them. And these are the contributions that was made to this country that people need to know about so they can be proud.
One of the things that I'm sorry, one of the things that I really need people to understand that plays into what Chief Baba Neal is saying. New York is the wealthiest colony in the 13th. Most of the houses that we maintain as historic houses are of the elite class. They are equal to European royalty. They are wealth personified, and most of them did not start out that way. They got that way because of the work of the enslaved. And then we have to look at the houses, the day-to-day lives. That, when we go into these beautiful houses and we see this porcelain from China and we see the silk dresses and all that silver, somebody had to take care of all that stuff. Somebody had to create beautiful meals to grace those tables. Somebody had to care for that silk fabric. Somebody had to plow those fields. Somebody had to understand the math and the technology to run not just one set, but sometimes multiple sets of millstones at a time. I mean, that's the thing that, one of the things I really appreciate is the work that Historic Hudson Valley has done, particularly the upper mill around the milling. When that mill was in full production, that was 5,000 pounds of flour a day. That is not chip shot. This is not like, we're not talking a couple of pounds. And they had 2 of those mills. That's 2 sets of stones. Somebody needs to know how to care for that machinery, dress those stones. Somebody is speaking multiple languages to deal with all the different tenant farmers. Somebody has to do that math. Somebody has to make those barrels. We got coopers everywhere. Most of them are enslaved Africans. We've got boatmen up and down the Hudson. Most of them are enslaved Africans. When we talk about the servants, when we look at shows like Downton's Abbey or any Bridgerton and all that, and we see that excellence of service, that is the enslaved here in New York. Because these people, the wealthy class, European class, do not have to suffer a bad life. If they don't like it, they can sell the person and get somebody else. So when we look at the skill set, we devalue that, but we really need to think about what it takes. I polished the silver trade today. I can tell you, it's not easy. And we have museums. The Brooklyn Museum is full of the Van Cortlandt silver. You go to the Met, you see these large collections, but we don't really take the time to think about the skill of the people who maintain the lives that we are often way too envious of.
And the knowledge of the people,
Yes.
the knowledge of the people. It's not that these are not stupid people. These are not uneducated people. These are not, who very often they taught their masters. Very often they taught their master, but they didn't get credit because of the nature of the dynamic between the enslaved and the enslavers. And it's important that, when we talk about education, education is not simply, and literacy is not simply reading words on a page. It has to do with reading trees and reading seasons and reading plants and reading migration patterns and reading all of these various things that Africans came here, and the navigational skills that Africans came here with those skills. And it's very important that we put these intellectual qualities in the context that they need to be put in.
Yeah. One of you're reminding me of a lot of things we talked about leading up to this event. And, I came in pretty ignorant, not even knowing what Pentecost is. So I've been doing a lot of reading. And one of the questions I asked you both was, I'm starting from scratch, where I could get more information. And you both pointed me in some great directions. Definitely the Holloway book, Africanisms. And I've also, I might need some help in pronouncing it. I'm not great with the Dutch names. This wonderful thesis from the Pinkster King and the King of Congo. Joren, how do you pronounce? Uh-oh, sorry, we don't have any Dutch people here, but Joren de Wolf. But one of the things that I really was impressed by in reading this is also to your point about the skill sets and the knowledge that's brought with them. I think that sometimes we paint Africa with like a broad stroke, right? Like it was all one culture. And in this book particularly, he really talks about that the variety of cultures that were coming over and being enslaved by the Dutch, which definitely was happening. And he really pokes at that idea of the benign Dutch slaveholder in comparison to the British or French or other slaveholders, but also that even what they were bringing from Africa was really a syncretic culture that was already influenced by Europe, was already crossing cultures within Africa, and really adds this other dimension to what is being brought over. I think especially when we kind of get to this, people always kind of want to say like, is this original? Is this original? I bet you get that too, Meredith. This idea of something that's like pure, original, what's the other, authentic, right? And I think that to understand what is coming from Africa and what is being brought as intellectually rigorous, as diverse, as syncretic, I mean, you have Portuguese influence, you have Iberian influence already in these places. And I'd love, especially in your own field, sort of how it is, kind of just drawing attention to some of those dimensions within Pinkster itself, if there's anything that kind of comes forward for you.
Well, one of the things that has come forward to me is, right now everyone's, jazzed on decolonizing their mind, right? We have to go back and study Africa. As you said, it is a continent. It is not a country. We have to stop talking about it that way. And the wonderful thing about where a lot of the technology is, particularly like the John Jay slave network, they had a list of like almost every ship that came into New York. So we know at least the starting points where the ships came from. So the mixture of people are going to be close to wherever that port is. So that allows us to go back and look directly at those cultures. A lot of people don't realize that the Portuguese stepped into the Kingdom of Congo in the late 14th, early 15th century. So there's 200 years of direct contact, not just with Portugal, but with Rome and Spain and other European countries with the Kingdom of Congo. To the point that by the time we get into the thick of the slave trade, the king has a European name. They're wearing European clothes. They have already been in these long dynamic relationships. It is really, and all of that then plays in here because there is a Congolese Christian rite. So when we talk about Pinkster and we talk about how it is celebrated, this is not new to them. They are celebrating something that is already a part of their cultural heritage. And, we think, oh, well, they've all done this adapting. It is really very important that we look at the lies that the Europeans put out there around Africa and enslavement, and the people that are coming from there, and dispel those. And you have a lot of exhibits that have done that. And one that I would commend, I think you can still, get the book, the catalog on Amazon, is Congo, Majesty and Power. It was a beautiful exhibit that the Met did about 5-6 years ago now, where they had all of these letters from the King of Congo and, the King of Portugal, where a lot of things that had been taken out of the Congo in the 17th century that had been in the museums, was part of the museums around the world, have been declassified and were on travel. The fabrics, the carving, but the comments from the Europeans, the diaries from the Europeans about what they were seeing and what they were discovering, and they were blown away. They were blown away. But that's not what we learn. That's not what we hear. But it is there, and more of that is becoming easily available. And you can find now videos on YouTube about it. You can go to almost all of the world's major museums, like the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands is bringing a lot of their stuff forward. In France, a lot of, in Belgium, a lot of the museums are bringing these early artifacts forward to try to make reparations in some way, at least by helping to restore cultural honesty.
Even when I was looking back at even how our organization, the Wyckoff House, and I had celebrated Pinkster over the last 30 years. In the 90s, we'd actually celebrated it. I found, trying to look for them now, some old flyers that, you know, were printed. It was celebrated completely sanitized and scrubbed of any African influence. And I'm not saying that as a way to shame, you know, the organization early on. Amazingly, under one of our previous directors and education directors, they really brought it back in the early 2000s as a celebration of African culture, bringing in drum making, African drum making, and it was really celebrated as a carnival. But even in a matter of 10 years, I think what you're speaking to is sort of organizationally having some humility in how it is that we have, how we've interpreted. And it's not so much about, you know, saying we were 100% wrong, but I really am interested in how we can look at some of the same paintings and the same documents and the same research with fresh eyes, looking for new
that
things.
is what we're doing now, and that's really what all of the major museums are doing. And I'm glad that both of you, I know is fledgling, but the Northern Slavery Consortium is doing that. It is part of what the state of New York is doing. It is part of what the state of New Jersey is doing. I'm doing a program in a few weeks for Passaic County, looking at what's happening, the reinterpretation at Day Mansion, and also the Trent House. It's happening all over the region because we just have to, you know, the public is demanding it, and we're just tired of telling the lies. Yeah. How do you have these people live these glorious life and like they're not doing anything? Who is the servants? Who are all these people? And everyone wants to talk about, oh, the indentured servants. But when you go back again to the paper and you look at the bookkeeping, there are no payments for Europeans happening. Yeah. Right? It's just not there. We're just not seeing it. So we just have to really be honest and let go of the guilt of not knowing. That's the thing I think is challenging for many people, or that they can't tell the story because they are not of African descent culture. It is our story. It is American history. Just like as we are all struggling to get the names of the native peoples in our area correct, because they change all the time. You know, as we are, you know, doing the land claiming, we have to bring everyone present. We have to talk about those people of African descent. We have to talk about the natives. We have to talk about the women. We have to talk about everybody, not just the one white guy at the top.
Most of our houses are named after.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a matter that I think we're at a moment in time where there's a recognition that there's a social sickness that needs to be addressed. There's the social sickness that needs to be addressed. Inequality, bias, supremacy, we don't have to reiterate, but there's a social sickness that plays out in all dimensions of our society. So we're at a time, once again, because we've been here several times before, where do we want to have an honest interpretation of the history of this country, of the history of this region, of the history of our society, so that our children or our grandchildren don't have to be back here again because we slapped a Band-Aid on it and look the other way because we can get away with it in the moment. You know, the furor diminishes, people calm down, they're dealing with the everyday necessities, but the problems are not being addressed. And it's going to show up again because it has to show up again because inequity cannot exist. So that being said, the narrative that these various institutions serve as touch points to plug into the narrative, it has to be situated in time. And I mean, how far we can go back. So we have to decide how far we're going to go back. But when we talk about the interaction between Europe and Africa, what the Dutch got to Africa? No, it was the Portuguese that got to the Congo about 1483. Yeah, and the king of the Congo converted to Christianity in 1491. Yeah, but then let's think about the fact of all of those bling-oriented folks in 21st century. If we Googled the richest man in history, who was the richest person in history?
Mansa Musa?
Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa.
I wouldn't have known it otherwise.
The king of the emperor of Mali, who made his Hajj in 1324 and impacted on the total economy of Europe by his wealth. And it's documented that he was. When we talk about people who are looking to get their degrees and their advanced degrees, you want to get your BA, you want to get your MA, you want to get your PhD. What was the first institute? What was the first university? It was in Mali. It was in Mali. When we look at the exploration of Europeans, it was after the expulsion of the Moors. And the Moors were ruling Africa for 700 years. So it was actually when the Moors were expelled from Spain that Ferdinand and Isabella sent Columbus looking. So, I mean, at what point, you know, but they were going to look because they cut off their nose to spite their face by expelling the Moors. They cut themselves off from everything that was coming across from North African trade. So look at what we're talking about here. We're talking about international networks. So these stereotypical perceptions of Africa that have been advanced by these people who are looking to support their supremacist narrative. I mean, all you got to do is peek behind the curtain just a little bit, just a little bit. You know, and I feel very strongly about this because I'm sitting here talking about this. My scholarly research really began in earnest from Pinkster, from being called to be a participant in the Pinkster reenactments at Phillipsburg Manor. And then after a couple of years, I'm finding out that I'm actually portraying a drummer who lived. King Charlie was a drummer who lived. His career was documented in the Pinkster festivals as a young buck-strong drummer and as an elder who oversaw the younger drummer, which meant he had a career. This was not a one-off. This was not somebody that just, somebody saw him beating it, but he was doing this recurringly, and he had a reputation. And he was the Pinkster King because he was descended from royalty in Angola. And there are other drummers who are documented. So there are all these dimensions, and it got to the point where I'm a Schomburg Fellow. I'm a Schomburg Fellow. And my research began in earnest as a drummer who wanted to know more about these artistic exercises and expressions that I was participating in. So my thing is this is not out of reach, and this is not out of comprehension to anybody who is interested in pursuing it.
Well, that brings me to two things. Is I wanted to sort of, point out in that great video of you, Chief Bob and Neil, with the other musicians playing, we see right behind Wyckoff the car wash, which I've seen a million times and hadn't really noticed all the Caribbean flags flying right above. Sometimes you think, oh no, we need to take that, we need to scrub that from the picture, but actually that's a huge piece of what the picture is. Talking about coming full circle is today Wyckoff is in East Flatbush. It's largely, we have a lot of immigrants coming into East Flatbush from Caribbean countries like Haiti and Guyana, Jamaica, Grenada, Barbados. Meredith, up in Inwood around what's the Dyckman Farmhouse.
Inwood has seen obviously many waves of immigration over the years. Huge wave of Irish immigration in the 1900s, in the mid 1900s. But then starting around the 1980s, we see huge waves of immigration that continue today from the Dominican Republic. So today we're in a 70%, maybe more, Spanish speaking community, and largely Dominican, also people from other Central and South American countries like Mexico.
So,
and the thing is, if you look back at the history of New York, the families here have connections all through the Caribbean. People are coming enslaved and free from there here. I was just reading a recent document that talked about a woman bringing her enslaved from Haiti when she fled what was happening there. She brought them here to New York. And then when she tried to take them out of New York, there was a riot in front of her house because enslavement had already ended here. Like, no, they're free. You can't take them. We have Livingstons in Jamaica. We've got Phillips family in Barbados. We have all of this trade. I was just reading some of the Phillips cargo coming out of Barbados, and it's listing all of these things. And in the middle of it, tucked are 4 Negro boys. So we think this whole wave of immigration is new, but this wave of immigration from the Caribbean, this relationship that New York has with the Caribbean, actually dates to the 17th century. It has been ongoing. It has never not existed. It is not new. And that's what we really need to reclaim, is to help people see that all of Pinkster belongs to everyone, because everyone has been here. People have been on these boats, the schooners going up and down from New York to the Caribbean, into Brazil. It's always there. It has never not been.
I've got to do a little plug for for coming up. We actually have a date, August 28th. Save the date. We'll be holding our 3rd Minokan Festival, or Festival Minokan, which is a celebration of Haiti's, a different Lacour group that we've been doing with Fanmia Soto and Serendantor, a voodoo priestess. So, kind of thinking of ways that we already celebrate the spirit of Pinkster in our own cultures. And, our Haitian friends have been doing this kind of celebration of their own freedoms, of these own influences. I was asking you how we can celebrate, and I was thinking of the ways that we already celebrate in our own homes, our own festivals, in our own cultures. And maybe it's a great way to wrap up is some of the ways that you might suggest we can take the spirit of Pinkster and celebrate it in our homes with our families, and ideally help emanate that out to becoming more of a local, if not a national holiday, something we can really get our hands around. So save the date, August 28th.
I think it's important that we remember that Pinkster always had that gumbo, that cultural gumbo, that cultural stew dimension to it. And I think it is going to reflect different ingredients and different components depending on the era that one looks at. I would venture to say that in the 200 years that Pinkster was historically celebrated, from the inception around 1624 or 1650 or whenever it may have started until the outlawing of it, the prohibition of it in Albany in 1811, but then it still continued to 1824, somewhere along this. 1823, 1822 may have been the last documented celebration, I'm not sure, but I would venture to say that in those 200 years, from year to year, the cultural tone, the layers and the dimensions of the celebration of Pinkster, which we have to remember, it was the premise of it was to celebrate the Pentecost. But then once we got beyond the premise of Pentecost, the manner in which we celebrated it, I don't think it's any different than the Christmas celebration in the Branfman house and in the Horsford house and in the Nahon house. And it's going to be different, but it's still Christmas, is it not?
Not
And so, no, okay, but whatever, or Halloween, or any or the 4th of July, or whatever holiday we may be celebrating, the cultural tone, the foods that are on the table that form the feast, and the music that is played, but it's still about festival. It's still about celebration. And I think we have the opportunity going forward in 2021 to say, this is a celebration that took place where people who were enslaved celebrated their pre-enslavement heritage, their pre-enslavement culture here. It's an opportunity for people who have migrated to take the time to celebrate their culture and their heritage that they have brought here. Let's do a Dominican Pinkster. Let's do a Jamaican Pinkster. Let's do a Puerto Rican Pinkster. Because all of these things, I think, are appropriate for the pertinence of Pinkster in 2021, so that it's not stayed and dead and something that's irrelevant because it's a historical event. In the same way that these historic events are, you all have computers in those historic houses, don't you? You have electric lights and you have modern plumbing. I'm sure they didn't have. So in the same way we're using these physical edifices to celebrate their heritage, we can use them also to exercise a modern interpretation of the holiday without losing sight of what the inception and what the origin and what the spirit of it is. And I think we have a wonderful opportunity to show the young people that are coming behind us what our New York, because I don't know if Pinkster ever will be pertinent nationally any more than Congo Square is pertinent nationally. Congo Square is uniquely New Orleans. I think Pinkster is uniquely Hudson River Valley, and I think we should honor it and celebrate it. If somebody wants to adopt it, that's okay. But I don't, the same way that we could say, well, Juneteenth was adopted from Texas. We celebrated, but it was what happened in Texas that we're celebrating wherever we are. If somebody wants to celebrate Pinkster, that's great. But understand, it's something that is indigenous to New York. It's indigenous to the Hudson River Valley. It's an indigenous to American history in that context.
So I'm going to expand it, not just Hudson River Valley, but New Netherland. It is the New Netherland region.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I think it is important because we see in the runaway as the languages that the enslaved are speaking. They're speaking Spanish, and we have Spanish Negroes here, or this person is from the island and speaks broken English, but they also speak Portuguese. They also speak, French. So it is about the inclusiveness and seeing the people. Can we get to the people? Let's get to the people. Let's get to the culture. So what is your culture? Bring that forward. The diaspora has always been part and parcel of New York. New York was founded by a company. You need to remember that. The Dutch West India, well, East India first, that quickly became the West India. But the Dutch West India Company were international merchant traders. And those ships went from New York to the Caribbean to South America all the time. And so the people are flowing back and forth then as they do now. Let's bring all of those cultures forward. Let's all celebrate and let's start looking back into the cultures that have been denied us. And that is, where did the people come from?
I think that's all part of what the narrative of Pinkster is going forward.
Well, we're very
I'm sorry, because that's one of the things about Pentecost, right? The apostles flew over the doors and everybody heard them in their own language.
That's right.
So we are people of many languages. We are people of many, the diaspora is huge, but we all came from one area. Spread, changed, intermarried, a whole lot of things. But so it is that connectedness.
Absolutely.
I just want to add that we're doing, we at the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum have never had a Pinkster celebration, but we're having our first ever this year. And it's
Really?
going to be this coming Thursday, which is May 27th. And we're doing this in partnership with Okra Dance Company. And so it's going to be all music and dance focused. So we welcome you to join in. And it's our first ever in-person program since COVID.
When is that?
This coming Thursday, May 27th at 6 p.m.
Thursday.
And I love it. You can follow the okra, right?
That's right.
Food from Africa, that's everywhere there is diaspora, you have okra. Everywhere there is diaspora, you have black eyed peas. Like, follow the food.
We're growing them both at Wyckoff. Well, the great thing is we got a little seed funding for this project through New York State Council of the Arts, NYSCA, and this is a 2-year project. So this is sort of our first year, and we've gathered an initial team to get started. And next year, we have a lot to think about in terms of how we bring that flavor. And hopefully we can do this in person, live, and together. We'll be dancing, drumming, and celebrating in 2022.
And before we go, I would just like to ask everyone, my hope and my intention is to get an official recognition of Pinkster by the New York State Legislature so that Pinkster can be on the official New York State calendar. So going forward, I'm going to be reaching out to everyone. This is something that I've been working on for several years now. And I'm so happy to be here with everybody and to hear that we're expanding this conversation about Pinkster. So maybe they'll start hearing us on Pinkster Hill. They'll start hearing us on Pinkster Hill and maybe give Pinkster Hill its appropriate recognition in the history of New York State.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Maybe next year when we're gathering again, we'll look back and see what we've accomplished. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have imagined Juneteenth would have been a federal holiday. So I think that we have your lofty goal is getting closer and closer.
Yes, and Juneteenth is now a state holiday. This is the first year we're doing that. Yeah. So there's hope, and there is a place for that marker. I pass it every day. Yep. So there is a monument that was promised to be removed that still needs to go. And there is a great replacement. And I look forward to Pinkster being in that spot.
That is my intention.
Well, thank you all. Definitely check out the Okra Project at Dyckman Farmhouse in celebration of Pinkster on the 27th. We'll have the Festival Minokin on August 28th. I think that will be live. And stay tuned for a 2022 Pinkster celebration and hopefully a state designation as well. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Great chatting.